I'm Marina Chen, 32 years old, and I built my career as a marine biologist and environmental consultant from nothing but scholarship money and an unshakable love for the ocean. Growing up in Portland, Oregon, my family always made it clear that my older sister Vanessa was the one who needed support, guidance, and unlimited resources. I accepted this reality until that November evening when my mother casually informed me that I would be spending New Year's Eve babysitting 7 children ranging from 18 months to 12 years old, while the entire extended family attended the biggest celebration of the year at the Columbia River Yacht Club. What she didn't know was that I had already booked a 10-day research cruise to the Galápagos Islands, a trip that represented not just a vacation but a pivotal moment in my career trajectory. If you've ever been treated like the family servant while your siblings received endless support and recognition, drop a comment below and subscribe to hear how I finally showed my family that my time, my career, and my life choices deserve the same respect they automatically gave to everyone else. Where are you watching from today, and have you ever had to choose between family expectations and your own dreams? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I grew up in a comfortable suburb of Portland where the streets were lined with mature oak trees and every house seemed to compete for the title of most impressive holiday light display. My father operated a successful dental practice that had been serving the community for 30 years, providing our family with financial security that translated into private school educations, annual ski trips to Mount Hood, and a spacious craftsman-style home with a view of the West Hills. My mother had left her nursing career when Vanessa was born and dedicated herself entirely to managing the household and our social calendar, which she approached with the intensity of a military campaign. From the outside, we appeared to be the ideal American family, prosperous and close-knit, but the internal dynamics told a different story entirely. Vanessa was born when my parents had been trying to conceive for 7 years, and her arrival was treated as nothing short of miraculous. By the time I came along 3 years later, apparently an unplanned surprise, the family structure was already firmly established with Vanessa at the center of everything. Every milestone she reached was documented extensively and celebrated with elaborate parties. Her first steps were captured on video and shown to relatives repeatedly. Her first words were recorded in a baby book that my mother still kept prominently displayed on the living room bookshelf. When she started kindergarten, my mother volunteered as room parent, and never missed a single school event or field trip. My own early childhood existed in the shadow of Vanessa's continued reign as the family's primary focus. There were photographs of me as a baby and toddler certainly, but they were filed away in boxes rather than displayed throughout the house like Vanessa's professional portraits. My mother attended my school events when they didn't conflict with Vanessa's schedule, which increasingly they did as Vanessa became involved in competitive dance that required travel to regional and national competitions. My father's attention was similarly divided, with Vanessa receiving his undivided focus during their nightly homework sessions, while I learned to complete my assignments independently at the kitchen table. The disparity in treatment became increasingly apparent as we moved through elementary school. Vanessa struggled academically despite receiving tutoring, special accommodations, and my father's nightly assistance. She was diagnosed with a learning disability in 3rd grade, which my parents treated as a crisis requiring immediate and comprehensive intervention. They hired educational specialists, enrolled her in special programs, and restructured the entire household routine around her needs. Meanwhile, I was bringing home straight A's with minimal effort, a fact that was acknowledged with distracted nods and the occasional comment that I was naturally gifted and didn't require the same level of support. By the time I was 10 years old, I had absorbed the family's unspoken message with perfect clarity. Vanessa needed help, attention, and resources because she struggled. I was capable and independent, which meant I should simply take care of myself and not create additional demands on my parents' already stretched attention. This became a self-fulfilling prophecy that shaped my development in profound ways. I learned to pack my own lunches using whatever I could find in the refrigerator. I walked myself to school and to my after-school activities. I managed my own schedule, keeping track of assignment due dates and project deadlines without reminders or assistance. I became exceptionally self-sufficient because self-sufficiency was the only option available to me. The pattern intensified during middle school, when Vanessa's social struggles became the family's consuming focus. She had difficulty making friends and maintaining relationships, which my mother attributed to her learning disability and the cruel nature of adolescent social hierarchies. My parents threw elaborate parties to help Vanessa build friendships, hired a social skills coach, and constantly intervened in her peer conflicts. When I experienced my own social challenges, including a painful falling out with my closest friend group in 7th grade, my mother's advice was brief and dismissive. "You're naturally outgoing, Marina. You'll make new friends easily. Just be yourself and everything will work out fine." I did make new friends eventually, but the process was lonely and painful in ways my parents never acknowledged or even noticed. I learned to process emotional challenges independently, to solve my own problems without expecting help, and to present a competent, untroubled exterior regardless of what I was experiencing internally. These coping mechanisms served me well in many ways, building resilience and self-reliance that would prove valuable in adulthood. However, they also created a deep sense of invisibility within my own family, a feeling that my experiences and emotions simply didn't register as worthy of attention or concern. High school brought the disparity into even sharper focus. Vanessa attended the local public high school where my parents advocated fiercely for accommodations and support services. They attended every IEP meeting, communicated regularly with her teachers, and ensured she received extended time on tests and assignments. She participated in the school's theater program, which required significant parental involvement in terms of transportation, costume preparation, and attendance at performances. My parents rarely missed one of Vanessa's shows, often attending multiple performances of the same production. I had tested into a highly selective science and technology magnet program across town that required a 45-minute commute each way. My parents were proud of my acceptance, certainly, but made it clear that I would need to manage the logistics independently. I took 2 buses to reach school each morning, leaving the house at 6:15 to arrive in time for my 7:30 class. I stayed late most days for robotics club and marine science team, then took the buses home, usually arriving around 6 in the evening. My parents attended exactly 2 of my robotics competitions over 4 years, and never came to see our marine science team compete at the state level, where we placed second my junior year and first my senior year. The academic disparity between Vanessa and me created an uncomfortable dynamic that my parents managed by emphasizing that we each had our own strengths and challenges. Vanessa was creative and artistic, they explained, while I was analytical and science-minded. These were simply different paths, neither superior to the other. However, the family's resource allocation told a different story entirely. Vanessa's dance competitions, theater involvement, and social activities received unlimited financial support and parental time investment. My academic interests were expected to be self-funding, with me working part-time at a local aquarium gift shop starting at age 15 to pay for science camp fees, competition travel, and the used diving equipment I needed for the marine biology internship I secured through persistent effort and self-advocacy. College application season crystallized the family's priorities with painful clarity. Vanessa was applying to small liberal arts colleges with strong support services for students with learning disabilities. My parents hired a private college counselor to help her navigate the application process, write compelling essays, and identify schools that would be good fits. They visited a dozen campuses over the course of her senior year, treating each trip as a family adventure. When Vanessa was accepted to Willamette University with a partial scholarship and generous financial aid package, my parents threw a graduation party for 50 people, complete with a custom cake and a slideshow of Vanessa's accomplishments. I was applying to highly competitive programs in marine biology and environmental science, dreaming of studying at institutions near the ocean I had loved since childhood. I researched programs independently, wrote my own essays, and even arranged my own campus visits, traveling by bus to the University of Washington, and taking advantage of a friend's family vacation to see Scripps Institution of Oceanography in San Diego. When my acceptance letter arrived from the University of California, Santa Barbara, with a full merit scholarship that would cover tuition, room, and board, my parents' response was characteristically muted. "That's wonderful, Marina. We knew you'd do well. You've always been so self-directed." There was no party, no celebration, no acknowledgement that I had achieved something genuinely remarkable. The full scholarship meant I wouldn't be a financial burden on the family, which seemed to be the primary point of interest. My mother mentioned it to relatives in passing, usually in the context of explaining that they could now focus their financial resources on supporting Vanessa through college. The contrast between the family's response to Vanessa's acceptance to a regional university and my full scholarship to a top-tier research institution was so stark that even my extended family members commented on it, though never directly to my parents. I left for Santa Barbara the summer after graduation with a mixture of excitement and relief. For the first time in my life, I would be in an environment where my abilities and interests were not just acknowledged but celebrated and cultivated. The marine biology program at UCSB was everything I had dreamed of, rigorous and inspiring, filled with professors who were leading researchers in their fields and fellow students who shared my passion for ocean science. I dove into my studies with intensity that surprised even my academically driven peers, taking extra courses, volunteering for research projects, and spending every possible moment either in the lab or in the water. During my sophomore year, I had the opportunity to participate in a research expedition studying kelp forest ecosystems off the California coast. It was a transformative experience that confirmed my decision to pursue marine biology as a career. I spent 3 weeks living on a research vessel, collecting data, conducting underwater surveys, and learning from scientists whose work I had admired for years. When I called home to share my excitement about the expedition, my mother's response was perfunctory. "That sounds nice, dear. Did you hear that Vanessa made the dean's list this semester? We're so proud of her progress." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The pattern continued throughout my undergraduate years. Every achievement I shared with my family was acknowledged briefly before the conversation shifted back to Vanessa's ongoing challenges and modest successes, which were treated as major triumphs worthy of extensive discussion and celebration. Vanessa struggled through college, changing majors 3 times and requiring an extra year to complete her degree. My parents provided constant emotional and financial support, flying to Oregon multiple times each semester to help her navigate various crises. Meanwhile, I was graduating summa cum laude with multiple research publications and acceptance to a prestigious doctoral program in marine ecology at the University of Miami's Rosenstiel School of Marine and Atmospheric Science, again with full funding. My parents attended my UCSB graduation, though they spent much of the weekend discussing their concerns about Vanessa's job prospects and whether she should move back home after completing her degree. The doctoral program acceptance that I had worked toward for years received mild congratulations, followed immediately by questions about whether I really needed more education and whether I had considered just getting a job instead of spending more years in school. The implication was clear. My continued education was an indulgence, while Vanessa's struggle to complete a bachelor's degree was a legitimate challenge requiring family support and understanding. Miami was a revelation. The Rosenstiel School provided an environment where my work was not just valued but essential to ongoing research projects with real-world impact. My doctoral research focused on coral reef resilience in the face of climate change and ocean acidification, work that contributed to conservation policy discussions at the national level. I published papers in respected journals, presented at international conferences, and built a professional network that would serve me throughout my career. I also finally found a community of people who understood my drive and passion, who didn't view my accomplishments as threatening or my independence as evidence that I didn't need support or recognition. It was in Miami that I met Dr. Sarah Okafor, the professor who would become not just my doctoral advisor but a true mentor in ways my parents had never been. Sarah was a Nigerian-born marine ecologist whose own path to success had been marked by obstacles and lack of family support. She recognized immediately the dynamics I had grown up with and made it her mission to ensure I understood my worth and potential. "You've been conditioned to minimize your achievements and make yourself small," she told me during one of our regular mentoring sessions. "Part of becoming the scientist you're meant to be involves learning to claim your space and your accomplishments without apology." Sarah introduced me to other women in marine science who had faced similar family dynamics, creating a chosen family of colleagues and mentors who celebrated my successes and supported me through challenges. This community showed me what healthy support systems looked like, relationships based on mutual respect and genuine interest, rather than obligatory family ties. For the first time, I began to understand that the way my family had treated me was not normal or inevitable, but rather a pattern that I could choose to accept or challenge. I completed my doctoral degree in 4 years, a timeline that was ambitious but achievable given my focus and the quality of my research. My dissertation on coral reef recovery mechanisms after bleaching events was well received and led to immediate job offers from research institutions and environmental consulting firms. I accepted a position with Pacific Marine Consultants, a firm based in Seattle that worked with governments, NGOs, and private sector clients on ocean conservation and sustainable development projects. The position offered an excellent salary, the opportunity to continue conducting meaningful research, and the chance to return to the Pacific Northwest, though I would be living in Seattle rather than Portland. The move back to the region meant I was close enough for regular family contact, something I had mixed feelings about, but felt obligated to maintain. My parents were pleased I was nearby again, though primarily because they assumed my proximity meant I would be available to help with family obligations. Vanessa had indeed moved back home after college and was working a series of administrative jobs that never quite seemed to work out. She had married her college boyfriend, Marcus, when she was 25, and they had quickly started a family despite their unstable financial situation and the fact that they were living in my parents' basement. By the time I returned to Seattle at age 28, Vanessa and Marcus had 3 children under 5, and their household chaos had completely taken over my parents' home and lives. My parents had transformed their finished basement into a separate living space for Vanessa's family, complete with a kitchenette and extra bathroom. They provided free housing, free childcare, and significant financial support, justifying this arrangement by explaining that Vanessa and Marcus needed help getting on their feet, and that family should support family during difficult times. I had purchased my own condo in Seattle's Capitol Hill neighborhood with money I had carefully saved during graduate school, and my signing bonus from Pacific Marine Consultants. It was a modest 1-bedroom unit with a small balcony that had a partial view of Puget Sound, but it was mine, purchased entirely through my own effort without family assistance. When I invited my parents to see my new home, they visited once briefly, staying less than an hour and spending most of that time on their phones coordinating some crisis related to Vanessa's middle child's daycare situation. My career flourished in Seattle. Pacific Marine Consultants assigned me to increasingly high-profile projects, including an impact assessment for a proposed marine protected area and a consultation with a major shipping company on reducing their environmental footprint. I was promoted twice in 3 years, eventually becoming the youngest senior consultant in the firm's history. My work required frequent travel to coastal sites, research vessels, and international conferences, a lifestyle I found deeply satisfying. I was building something meaningful, contributing to ocean conservation in concrete ways, and finally receiving the professional recognition that had been absent from my family relationships. Despite my success and the geographic distance I had established, family obligations continued to intrude in ways that gradually became impossible to ignore. My mother had somehow decided that my work travel schedule made me an ideal backup childcare option whenever she or Vanessa needed help. The requests started small and seemingly reasonable. Could I watch the kids for a few hours on Saturday while Vanessa had a doctor's appointment? Could I pick up the older 2 from school one day when my mother had conflicting obligations? Each request was framed as a minor favor, something any family member would do without complaint. However, the requests quickly escalated in frequency and scope. I found myself driving to Portland nearly every weekend to provide childcare, often with less than 24 hours' notice. My professional obligations and personal plans were treated as infinitely flexible, while Vanessa's needs were presented as urgent and non-negotiable. When I tried to set boundaries, explaining that I had work commitments or personal plans, my mother's response was always some variation of the same guilt-inducing message. Family comes first, Marina. Vanessa needs help, and you're the only one who can provide it. You don't have children of your own, so you have the time and flexibility to help your sister. The assumption that my child-free status meant my time was less valuable than Vanessa's time was infuriating, though I struggled to articulate exactly why it bothered me so much. My career, my research, my personal relationships, and my own rest and recreation were apparently less legitimate than Vanessa's needs simply because I hadn't chosen to have children. The fact that Vanessa and Marcus had chosen to have 3 children despite their financial instability and their dependence on my parents seemed irrelevant to the family's calculus of who deserved support and whose sacrifices were expected. The situation reached a new level of dysfunction when Vanessa announced her fourth pregnancy during Thanksgiving dinner 2 years ago. She and Marcus had finally moved into their own rental house, a 2-bedroom place that was already overcrowded with 3 children. The pregnancy was unplanned, Vanessa admitted cheerfully, but they would make it work. My parents immediately pledged increased financial support and renewed offers of childcare assistance. I sat silently at the table, knowing that this 4th child would mean even more demands on my time, and even more family pressure to sacrifice my own life to support my sister's ever-expanding needs. My predictions proved accurate. After the 4th baby arrived, a daughter they named Isabella, the childcare demands on me intensified dramatically. Vanessa struggled with postpartum depression, a legitimate challenge that deserved support and treatment. However, my parents' solution was to demand that I provide more help, rather than ensuring Vanessa received professional mental health support. I drove to Portland every weekend for months, caring for 4 children while Vanessa rested and my parents maintained their social schedule. My work suffered as I constantly rearranged my travel schedule to accommodate family emergencies. My personal life became non-existent as I spent every weekend providing free childcare instead of maintaining friendships or pursuing my own interests. The final breaking point came in mid-November of this year when my mother called with her most audacious demand yet. The extended family had been invited to the Columbia River Yacht Club's New Year's Eve Gala, an exclusive event that my parents had been trying to get invited to for years. It was being hosted by one of my father's wealthiest clients, and my parents viewed attendance as crucial for their social standing. However, the gala was adults only, which created a childcare challenge given that Vanessa and Marcus had 4 children and my mother's sister's family had 3 more, including infant twins. Your father and I have been discussing the situation, my mother explained in the tone she used when presenting non-negotiable decisions as if they were open for discussion, and we've decided you'll watch all 7 children at our house on New Year's Eve. Vanessa and Marcus are attending the gala with us, of course, and Aunt Patricia and Uncle James need to attend as well since James works with your father. You don't have plans, do you? We assumed you'd be available since you don't usually go out for New Year's anyway. The casual assumption that I would sacrifice my New Year's Eve to babysit 7 children ranging from 18 months to 12 years old, allowing everyone else in the family to attend a prestigious party, was staggering in its entitlement. The fact that my mother hadn't even asked if I was available, but had simply informed me of the plan revealed everything about how my family viewed my role. I was not a person with my own life, goals, and desires. I was a resource to be deployed whenever the family needed something, with my compliance assumed rather than requested. What my mother didn't know, because she had never asked about my professional life in any meaningful way, was that I had just been invited to participate in a research expedition to the Galápagos Islands departing December 27 and returning January 6. The expedition was being led by Dr. Ramirez, one of the world's foremost experts on marine iguana ecology, and would focus on studying the impacts of El Niño events on endemic species. It was exactly the kind of opportunity one had dreamed about since first falling in love with marine biology, combining cutting-edge research with travel to one of the most extraordinary ecosystems on the planet. The expedition was also being filmed for a documentary series on climate change and ocean ecosystems, which would provide exposure for my work and potentially advance my career significantly. I had already accepted the invitation and booked my flights when my mother called with her New Year's Eve childcare demand. For a moment, I considered explaining the situation, detailing the professional significance of the Galápagos expedition and the impossibility of canceling. However, I realized with sudden clarity that I was done explaining, done justifying, and done seeking permission to live my own life. My family would never see my work as legitimate or my time as valuable, no matter how clearly I articulated the situation. The only way forward was to simply state my boundary and hold firm against the inevitable pressure. I won't be available for New Year's Eve, I told my mother calmly. I have a work commitment that I can't change. There was a long silence on the other end of the line before my mother responded with barely concealed irritation. What kind of work commitment could you possibly have over New Year's? Surely you can rearrange it. This is important, Marina. The family is counting on you. The assumption that my work could and should be rearranged to accommodate family social plans was so characteristic of my mother's worldview that I almost laughed. Instead, I simply repeated my statement. I won't be available. You'll need to make other arrangements. My mother's tone shifted from irritation to manipulation. Your sister really needs this night out, Marina. She's been struggling so much since Isabella was born. You know how hard things have been for her. This one night would mean so much to her mental health and recovery. The emotional blackmail was transparent but still effective at triggering my guilt. However, I had spent enough time in therapy over the past year, finally addressing the family dynamics that had shaped my life, to recognize the manipulation for what it was. Vanessa's mental health was important and deserved support, but that support should not automatically come at the expense of my own career and well-being. There were professional options for childcare, family friends who could help, or even the possibility that some family members could stay home with the children instead of assuming I would sacrifice my plans. I'm sorry Vanessa is struggling, I said carefully, and I hope she gets the support she needs. However, I won't be providing childcare on New Year's Eve. I have a professional commitment that I'm not willing to change. My mother's response escalated quickly from manipulation to anger. This is incredibly selfish, Marina. After everything this family has done for you, you can't take one evening to help your sister? What exactly has this family done for me, Mom? The question escaped before I could stop it. Years of accumulated resentment finally finding voice. I put myself through college and graduate school. I built my career without any family support or even acknowledgement. I've spent the last 2 years providing free childcare nearly every weekend while my own life has been put on hold. What exactly do I owe that I haven't already paid multiple times over? The silence that followed was absolute and heavy with shock. I had never challenged the family narrative so directly, never questioned the one-sided nature of our relationships. My mother recovered quickly, her voice cold and clipped. I can't believe you're bringing up ancient history. We supported you in our own way. Just because we didn't throw parties for every little academic achievement doesn't mean we didn't care. And you've chosen not to have children, so naturally you have more time to help family members who do. The conversation ended with my mother hanging up on me after delivering a final guilt-laden statement. I hope you can live with yourself knowing you've let your sister down when she needed you most. I sat in my silent apartment for a long time afterward, trembling slightly from the adrenaline of finally confronting decades of family dysfunction. Part of me felt guilty and uncertain, wondering if I was indeed being selfish as my mother claimed. However, a deeper part of me felt an unexpected sense of liberation. I had finally stated a clear boundary and refused to sacrifice my professional opportunity for family convenience. The next morning, I received a text from my father. Your mother told me about your conversation. Very disappointed in your attitude, Marina. Family obligations should come before work. We've never asked much of you, and this one night would mean a lot to your sister and the whole family. Please reconsider. The message was followed by a longer text from Vanessa herself. Can't believe you won't help me out on NYE. After all the times Mom and Dad have watched my kids, you'd think you could return the favor for once. Guess your fancy research is more important than family. Real nice, Marina. The irony of Vanessa accusing me of not returning favors when I had provided countless hours of free childcare, while she contributed nothing to my life, was almost amusing. The text continued throughout the day from various family members who had been recruited to apply pressure. My Aunt Patricia sent a message about how family sticks together during important events. A cousin I barely knew sent a lengthy text about the importance of supporting mothers, and how child-free people should be more generous with their time and resources. Each message revealed how thoroughly my mother had framed the situation, painting me as selfish and unreasonable for refusing to babysit while presenting the family's demand as perfectly reasonable. I responded to none of them, instead focusing on preparing for the Galápagos expedition. I purchased specialized underwater camera equipment for documenting our research, reviewed the scientific literature on marine iguanas and Galápagos ecosystems, and coordinated with Dr. Ramirez's team about the research protocols we would follow. The expedition represented everything I had worked toward in my career, combining rigorous science with conservation impact and professional recognition. I would not allow family guilt and manipulation to prevent me from seizing this opportunity. As New Year's Eve approached, the family pressure intensified rather than diminished. My mother left voicemail messages that alternated between anger and emotional manipulation. She accused me of abandoning family, of being cold and selfish, of prioritizing career over the people who had raised and supported me. The revisionist history in which my family had supported me was particularly galling, given that I had financed my own education and built my career entirely through my own effort. However, I recognized that my mother genuinely believed her own narrative, unable or unwilling to acknowledge the vast disparity in how she and my father had treated their two daughters. On December 26, as I packed my bags for the expedition, I received a final call from my father. He took a different approach than my mother's emotional manipulation, instead appealing to logic and reasonableness. "Look, Marina, I understand you have this work trip, but surely you can see that watching your nieces and nephews for one evening isn't too much to ask. Your mother and I have bent over backward to accommodate your sister's needs over the years, and we're just asking you to do the same for one night. Can't you push your trip back by a day or two?" The assumption that a complex research expedition involving multiple institutions, a research vessel, and a film crew could simply be rescheduled to accommodate my family's party plans revealed how little my father understood about my professional life. It also revealed how little he valued my work compared to the family's social aspirations. I explained calmly that the expedition could not be rescheduled, and that I would not be available for childcare on New Year's Eve or any other time during my 10-day research trip. My father's response was heavy with disappointment. "This is going to cause real problems in the family, Marina. Your mother is very hurt, and Vanessa feels betrayed. I hope whatever you're doing in the Galápagos is worth damaging your family relationships." With that guilt-laden pronouncement, he hung up, leaving me alone with my thoughts and my packed bags on the eve of my departure for the most significant professional opportunity of my career thus far. As I boarded the plane to Ecuador the next morning, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. There was excitement about the expedition and the research we would conduct. There was satisfaction at having finally set a firm boundary with my family after years of compliance with unreasonable demands. However, there was also genuine sadness at the state of my family relationships, and the realization that my parents and sister might never truly understand or respect my choices and my career. The plane lifted off, carrying me toward the Galápagos Islands and away from the family drama I had left behind in Portland, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was flying toward something I had chosen rather than running from something I couldn't fix. My childhood in Portland unfolded against a backdrop of privilege that made the emotional neglect harder to name or challenge. We lived in a neighborhood where success was measured in visible markers like the size of your home, the prestige of your children's schools, and the exclusivity of your club memberships. My parents had achieved all these markers through my father's thriving dental practice, which specialized in cosmetic dentistry for wealthy clients who valued discretion and perfection. Our house was a beautifully maintained craftsman with original hardwood floors, custom built-ins, and a garden that my mother tended with the same meticulous attention she applied to every aspect of our family's public presentation. The neighborhood itself was insular and competitive in ways that shaped my mother's worldview profoundly. The women in our social circle compared their children's achievements constantly, turning every school event and extracurricular activity into an opportunity for subtle one-upmanship. In this environment, having a child who struggled academically was perceived as a reflection on parental quality and family worth. My mother's response to Vanessa's learning difficulties was shaped entirely by this social pressure, treating my sister's challenges as problems to be solved through sufficient investment of resources and attention, rather than simply accepting Vanessa's natural abilities and limitations. I have specific memories from early childhood that crystallized the family dynamic with painful clarity. When I was 6 years old and Vanessa was 9, we both had spring recitals on the same Saturday afternoon. Vanessa was performing in a dance showcase at her studio across town, while I had a piano recital at our neighborhood community center. I had been practicing my piece for months, a simplified version of a Mozart sonata that my teacher said I played with unusual musical sensitivity for my age. The recital was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon, while Vanessa's dance showcase began at 4. The morning of the recital, my mother informed me that she and my father would be taking Vanessa to her dance showcase, and that our neighbor Mrs. Patterson would drive me to my piano recital and stay to watch my performance. The explanation was matter-of-fact and brooked no discussion. "Vanessa's showcase is across town and we need to get there early to help her prepare. Mrs. Patterson has kindly agreed to take you to your recital. You'll do wonderfully, I'm sure." I remember standing in our kitchen in my carefully chosen recital dress, a navy blue velvet outfit that I had been so excited to wear, feeling a crushing disappointment that I couldn't articulate or justify. Both events were important, both required parental attendance, yet somehow it had been decided that Vanessa's performance warranted my parents' presence while mine did not. Mrs. Patterson was kind and attentive during my recital, applauding enthusiastically when I completed my piece without errors. However, her presence felt like a poor substitute for my own parents, and I could see other children being hugged and congratulated by their families after their performances while I stood with a neighbor who was fulfilling an obligation, rather than celebrating someone she loved. When I returned home that evening, my parents were effusive in their praise of Vanessa's dance performance, describing every detail while barely asking about my recital beyond a perfunctory question about whether it had gone well. This pattern repeated throughout my childhood with such consistency that I eventually stopped expecting anything different. School plays, academic competitions, science fairs, and athletic events all fell into the same category of activities that I would attend either alone or with whatever adult could be recruited to provide supervision. My parents attended Vanessa's events religiously, viewing their presence as essential to her confidence and success. My own events were treated as optional, with attendance dependent on whether they conflicted with Vanessa's schedule or my parents' social commitments. The message I internalized from these experiences was that my achievements were less valuable than Vanessa's struggles, that my independence was evidence that I didn't need support, rather than recognition that I had learned to function without it. I became exceptionally skilled at managing disappointment, at lowering my expectations to levels that could be consistently met, and at finding validation from sources outside my family. My teachers became surrogate parents in many ways, offering the encouragement and recognition that my actual parents rarely provided. I formed intense friendships with other high-achieving students who understood ambition and drive in ways my family never seemed to grasp. Middle school brought new challenges that further highlighted the disparity in parental treatment. Vanessa struggled profoundly with the social complexities of adolescence, experiencing bullying and social exclusion that caused her genuine distress. My mother responded by essentially restructuring her entire life around managing Vanessa's social difficulties. She volunteered extensively at Vanessa's school, organized social events designed to help Vanessa build friendships, and spent hours each evening processing the day's social interactions with Vanessa, helping her understand social cues she had missed and strategizing about how to handle various peer relationships. The attention my mother devoted to Vanessa's social development was extraordinary in its intensity and consistency. She read books about helping children with learning disabilities navigate social situations, consulted with therapists and counselors, and maintained detailed notes about which classmates seemed kind to Vanessa and which should be avoided. The dining room table was often covered with plans for social events my mother was organizing, elaborate birthday parties and group outings designed to create positive social experiences for Vanessa. Meanwhile, I was navigating my own social challenges with essentially no parental support or guidance. In 7th grade, I experienced a devastating friend group implosion when my closest friends suddenly excluded me without explanation. The rejection was cruel and confusing, leaving me eating lunch alone and dreading school each day. When I tried to talk to my mother about the situation, her response was brief and dismissive. "Middle school girls can be difficult, Marina. Just focus on your schoolwork and the friends will sort themselves out. You're resilient and you'll figure it out." The contrast between the intensive support Vanessa received for her social struggles and the casual dismissal of my own difficulties was painfully clear. I did eventually figure it out, forming new friendships with students in my advanced classes who shared my academic interests. However, the process was lonely and painful in ways that might have been eased with parental guidance and support. Instead, I learned that my emotional needs were not priorities, that I was expected to solve my own problems regardless of how difficult or painful they might be. The academic disparity between Vanessa and me became increasingly pronounced as we moved through middle school and into high school. Despite the tutoring, accommodations, and intensive parental support, Vanessa struggled to maintain passing grades in most subjects. Her learning disability made traditional academic work genuinely challenging, and I understood that her difficulties were real and not a matter of insufficient effort. However, my parents' response to her struggles involved lowering expectations and celebrating achievements that would have been considered baseline expectations for me. When Vanessa received a C in 8th grade English, my parents took her out for a celebratory dinner, praising her hard work and improvement from her previous D grade. When I brought home my report card showing straight A's including advanced placement courses, the response was a brief glance and a comment that they expected nothing less given my natural abilities. The implication was clear. Vanessa's modest achievements required tremendous effort and therefore deserved celebration, while my high achievement came easily and therefore merited no special recognition. This dynamic created a situation where I actually began to hide my achievements to avoid highlighting the comparison with Vanessa. When I won the regional science fair in 9th grade with a project on ocean acidification and its effects on shellfish populations, I downplayed the achievement at home, mentioning it only briefly. My mother's response was distracted approval before launching into a detailed discussion of Vanessa's upcoming dance recital. When my science teacher called home to congratulate my parents on my achievement and inform them about the state competition I would be attending, my mother thanked her politely but never mentioned the call to me or asked about the state competition. I attended the state science fair alone, taking a bus to Salem and staying in a youth hostel, because my parents were attending a dance competition with Vanessa the same weekend. I placed 3rd in the state, an achievement that earned me scholarship opportunities and recognition from the scientific community. My parents' response when I returned home was perfunctory congratulations followed immediately by detailed stories about Vanessa's dance performance. The trophy I had won sat on my bedroom shelf, never displayed in the common areas of our home where Vanessa's dance awards covered an entire wall. High school intensified the pattern as the stakes of academic achievement grew higher with college applications looming. My acceptance to the Science and Technology Magnet program should have been celebrated as a significant achievement, but instead it was treated as a logistical inconvenience. The program was located across the city and required a 45-minute commute each way by public transportation. My parents made it clear that they would not be providing transportation and that I would need to manage the commute independently. At 14 years old, I learned the bus routes, planned my schedule around public transportation timing, and became accustomed to leaving the house in darkness during winter mornings to reach school by 7:30. The magnet program was academically rigorous and filled with students who shared my passion for science and learning. For the first time, I was surrounded by peers who valued intellectual curiosity and academic achievement, who didn't view my interests as strange or threatening. I thrived in this environment, taking advanced courses in marine biology, environmental science, and chemistry while participating in robotics club and the marine science team. The program required significant time investment, with most students staying after school for extracurricular activities and advanced lab work. I regularly arrived home at 6 or 7 in the evening after a full day of classes and activities, exhausted but intellectually fulfilled in ways that had been impossible in my previous school environment. My parents never visited the magnet school, never attended parent-teacher conferences there, and seemed to have only the vaguest understanding of what I was studying or achieving. When I tried to share my excitement about a particularly interesting marine biology experiment or a successful robotics competition, the conversation would be redirected to Vanessa within minutes. My father would glance at his watch and mention that he needed to help Vanessa with her homework, or my mother would interrupt to discuss some crisis Vanessa was experiencing with her theater group. The robotics club became a particularly important part of my high school experience. We competed in regional and state competitions, designing and building robots to complete complex tasks. The work required mechanical engineering, programming, problem-solving, and teamwork. I discovered that I had a particular talent for the programming aspects and became the lead programmer for our team. We won the regional competition my junior year and qualified for the state championship, where we placed 4th overall. My parents attended exactly 2 of my competitions over 3 years, arriving late and leaving early both times because of conflicts with Vanessa's schedule. The marine science team was similarly meaningful and similarly ignored by my family. We studied Pacific Northwest marine ecosystems, conducted field research, and competed in academic competitions testing our knowledge of marine biology, oceanography, and conservation issues. I loved everything about the team, including the weekend field trips to coastal sites, the detailed research projects, and the competitive events where we demonstrated our expertise. We placed 2nd at the state competition my junior year, and 1st my senior year. My parents attended neither competition despite my repeated invitations and reminders. The financial disparity in how my parents supported Vanessa versus me became increasingly apparent during high school. Vanessa's dance competitions required expensive costumes, competition fees, travel expenses, and private coaching. My parents paid for all of this without hesitation, treating it as a necessary investment in Vanessa's passion and talent. Her dance activities cost thousands of dollars annually, money that was provided freely and without conditions. Meanwhile, my academic and extracurricular interests were expected to be self-funding. The marine science team required fees for competitions and field trips. Robotics club had membership dues and travel expenses. Science camps and marine biology workshops required tuition that my parents made clear they would not be providing. At 15, I got a job working at the Oregon Coast Aquarium gift shop, a position that required me to take buses to the coast on weekends and during school breaks. The job was exhausting on top of my rigorous academic schedule, but it was the only way to fund the activities that mattered to me. I worked 20 hours per week during the school year and full-time during summers, saving every dollar for competition fees, camp tuition, and eventually college expenses. My parents expressed approval of my work ethic, but never seemed to recognize the disparity in how they were requiring me to fund my own interests while freely financing Vanessa's activities. The diving certification I needed for a marine biology internship opportunity during the summer before my senior year cost $800 for the course and equipment. I saved for months to afford it, working extra shifts at the aquarium and skipping social activities to conserve money. When I finally completed the certification and secured the internship studying seal populations along the Oregon coast, my excitement was met with distracted approval and immediate conversation redirection to Vanessa's summer plans, which included an expensive dance intensive that my parents were funding completely. The internship was transformative despite the lack of family support or recognition. I spent 6 weeks living in a research station, conducting daily observations of seal behavior, learning to identify individual animals, and contributing to data collection for a long-term population study. The lead researcher, Dr. Patricia Hernandez, recognized my potential and became an informal mentor, encouraging me to pursue marine biology in college and writing a recommendation letter that would prove crucial to my scholarship applications. She was the first adult who treated my scientific interests as legitimate professional aspirations rather than unusual hobbies that I would presumably outgrow. College application season brought the disparity in parental treatment into its sharpest focus. Vanessa was applying to small liberal arts colleges with strong support programs for students with learning disabilities. My parents hired a private college counselor at $200 per hour to guide her through the application process. The counselor met with Vanessa weekly, helping her identify appropriate schools, craft her personal essays, and prepare for interviews. My parents accompanied Vanessa on college visits to a dozen schools, treating each trip as a family adventure complete with nice dinners and tourist activities. Meanwhile, I was applying to highly competitive marine biology and environmental science programs at research universities. I researched programs entirely on my own, using college guides from the library and information I gathered from teachers and my aquarium supervisor. I wrote my personal essays alone at the kitchen table after finishing my homework and job shifts, crafting narratives about my passion for ocean conservation and my research experiences. I arranged my own college visits, taking buses to visit the University of Washington and managing to see the Scripps Institution of Oceanography when my friend's family invited me to join their San Diego vacation. When acceptance letters began arriving in the spring of my senior year, the contrast in family response was devastatingly clear. Vanessa received acceptances from several schools including Willamette University, a small liberal arts college in Salem with a strong support program. My parents threw a celebration party for 50 people, complete with a custom cake decorated with Willamette's colors, and a lengthy slideshow highlighting Vanessa's high school achievements. Extended family members attended, offering congratulations and gifts. The party lasted 4 hours and cost, I later learned, over $3,000. My acceptance letter from the University of California, Santa Barbara arrived 2 weeks later. I had been admitted to their prestigious marine biology program with a full merit scholarship covering tuition, room, board, and even a stipend for research expenses. The scholarship was highly competitive, awarded to only a handful of incoming students nationwide, based on academic achievement and research potential. It represented not only admission to one of the top marine science programs in the country, but also full financial support that would allow me to pursue my education without debt. I brought the acceptance letter to my parents with trembling hands, barely able to contain my excitement and pride. My mother glanced at the letter while preparing dinner, read the key details, and responded with casual approval. "That's wonderful, Marina. We knew you would do well somewhere. You've always been so capable." My father's response was similarly muted. "Good job, kiddo. That scholarship is helpful since we'll be supporting your sister financially through college." The implication was clear. My achievement was valued primarily because it meant I wouldn't be a financial burden on the family. There was no party, no celebration, no acknowledgement that I had accomplished something genuinely extraordinary. My mother mentioned my acceptance to a few relatives in passing, usually in the context of explaining that the scholarship meant they could focus their financial resources entirely on Vanessa. When my grandmother asked why there hadn't been a celebration for my acceptance, my mother's response was dismissive. "Marina doesn't need that kind of recognition. She's always been self-motivated and independent. She understands that we're proud of her even if we don't make a big fuss." The assumption that I didn't need recognition or celebration, because I was naturally independent and self-motivated, revealed the fundamental flaw in my parents' understanding of their children. Independence and self-motivation weren't innate personality traits that I had been born with. They were survival skills I had developed in response to their neglect, and the clear message that my needs and achievements were not family priorities. I had learned to be independent because dependence on my parents for support, recognition, or encouragement led only to disappointment. The summer before college was filled with preparation and growing anticipation. I worked full-time at the aquarium to save money for expenses the scholarship wouldn't cover, purchased the items I would need for dorm living, and researched my intended courses and professors. My parents were similarly focused on preparing Vanessa for her transition to college, but their preparation looked vastly different from mine. They accompanied Vanessa to multiple shopping trips for dorm furnishings, purchasing expensive bedding, decorations, and electronics. They attended orientation programs with her, and helped her connect with other incoming students through social media. My own preparation was solitary and self-directed. I found deals on used textbooks online, purchased dorm essentials from discount stores, and connected with my future roommate through the university housing portal. When move-in day arrived in late August, the contrast was again painfully clear. My parents had rented a U-Haul truck to transport Vanessa's belongings to Willamette, spending the entire day helping her set up her room and meeting her roommate and resident advisor. They took her to dinner that evening and lingered on campus, reluctant to leave their eldest daughter in this new environment. I moved to Santa Barbara a week later with 2 suitcases and a backpack, taking a flight I had booked myself using my savings. My parents drove me to the Portland airport and said goodbye at the curb, unable to take time off work to accompany me to California. I navigated the Santa Barbara airport alone, took a shuttle to campus, and moved into my dorm room without family assistance. My roommate's parents were there helping her unpack, and they kindly included me in their lunch plans, seeming surprised that I was managing the move-in process entirely alone. That first night in my dorm room, lying in my narrow bed and listening to the unfamiliar sounds of campus life outside my window, I felt a mixture of emotions that was difficult to untangle. There was excitement about the opportunities ahead and relief at having escaped the family dynamics that had shaped my childhood. There was also a profound sadness about the relationship I didn't have with my parents, the support and recognition I had deserved but never received. However, there was also a growing determination to build something meaningful with my life, to prove to myself even if never to my family that I was capable of extraordinary things. The transition to university life at Santa Barbara represented far more than a simple change of location or the beginning of academic studies. It marked the first time in my life that I existed in an environment where my abilities and interests were not just acknowledged but actively cultivated and celebrated. The University of California Santa Barbara's marine biology program was housed in a stunning complex of laboratories and classrooms situated literally steps from the Pacific Ocean, a physical manifestation of the integration between academic study and hands-on research that defined the program's philosophy. Walking to my first class along paths where I could hear the waves crashing and smell the salt air felt like arriving at a place I had been dreaming of my entire life without quite knowing it existed. The other students in my program were unlike anyone I had encountered in Portland. They came from diverse backgrounds and locations, but they shared an intense passion for ocean science and environmental conservation that made conversations feel electric with possibility. My freshman year roommate, Keiko Tanaka, was a second-generation Japanese American from San Diego who had grown up surfing and had decided to study marine biology after witnessing the decline of kelp forests near her childhood beaches. We stayed up late into the night during those first weeks of school, talking about ocean acidification, coral bleaching, overfishing, and the urgent need for better marine conservation policies. These conversations felt profoundly different from any I had experienced at home, where my interests were viewed as peculiar rather than valuable. The coursework was rigorous in ways that felt thrilling rather than burdensome. Introduction to Marine Biology was taught by Professor Michael Chen, a researcher whose work on deep-sea ecosystems had been featured in National Geographic documentaries. He treated us as junior colleagues from the first day of class, explaining that marine biology was not simply about learning facts about ocean organisms, but about developing the research skills and critical thinking necessary to address the environmental challenges facing our oceans. His enthusiasm was infectious, and I found myself spending hours in the library reading scientific papers beyond what was assigned, hungry to understand everything I could about marine ecosystems. The laboratory components of my courses provided the hands-on experience I had been craving throughout high school. We spent entire afternoons conducting experiments, examining specimens under microscopes, and learning proper research protocols. I discovered that I had a particular aptitude for careful observation and data collection, skills that would prove essential for research work. The teaching assistants who supervised our lab sections were graduate students pursuing their own research, and they treated us with a respect that felt revolutionary after years of being dismissed or overlooked. When I asked detailed questions about experimental design or requested clarification on complex concepts, they responded with genuine engagement, rather than the impatient dismissal I had learned to expect from my family. During the second semester of my freshman year, Professor Chen announced an opportunity that would change the trajectory of my academic career. His research group was planning a 3-week expedition to study kelp forest ecosystems off the California coast, and he was looking for 2 undergraduate students to join the team as volunteer research assistants. The expedition would take place during spring break, involve living on a research vessel, and require participants to be certified scuba divers. The announcement was met with excited murmurs throughout the lecture hall, and I felt my heart racing with the certainty that I needed to be selected for this opportunity. I approached Professor Chen after class, explaining my diving certification and my previous research experience with seal populations during my high school internship. His eyebrows raised with interest as I described the work I had done with Dr. Hernandez, particularly when I mentioned that I had learned to maintain detailed field notes and collect systematic behavioral observations. He asked several probing questions about my diving experience and my ability to work effectively in challenging conditions. When I explained that I had worked 20 hours per week throughout high school while maintaining my academic performance, he nodded approvingly. "The expedition requires people who are self-motivated and reliable," he said. "Email me your resume and a statement explaining why you want to participate. I'll make my decision by the end of the week." I spent the next 2 days crafting a statement that articulated not just my interest in kelp forest ecology, but my larger commitment to marine conservation, and my understanding that meaningful research required dedication, attention to detail, and the ability to work collaboratively with a research team. I described my high school research experience in detail, explaining what I had learned about field research methods and the importance of systematic data collection. I also wrote honestly about my background, explaining that I had funded my own education and research interests through work and scholarships, and that the opportunity to participate in a real research expedition represented the culmination of years of self-directed effort to prepare myself for a career in marine science. When Professor Chen called me into his office 3 days later, I was so nervous I could barely breathe. He gestured for me to sit down, and his expression was serious as he explained that he had received applications from 15 students for the 2 volunteer positions. "However, your statement and your background convinced me that you have the work ethic and the genuine commitment that this expedition requires," he said. "If you're willing to commit to the full 3 weeks and follow all safety protocols, I'd like to offer you one of the positions." The relief and joy I felt in that moment was overwhelming. I accepted immediately, thanking him profusely for the opportunity. The expedition took place during March of my freshman year, and it exceeded every expectation I had harbored. We departed from Santa Barbara Harbor on a 60-foot research vessel that would serve as our floating laboratory and living quarters for 3 weeks. The research team included Professor Chen, 2 graduate students named Marcus and Jennifer who were pursuing their doctoral research on kelp forest dynamics, and another undergraduate named David who was a junior with extensive diving experience. The vessel's crew consisted of a captain and a mate who managed navigation and ship operations while we focused on research activities. Our days followed a consistent rhythm that began before sunrise. We would motor to our research site, a kelp forest located in relatively shallow water off the Channel Islands. After breakfast, we would prepare our diving equipment and review the data collection protocols for the day. The research involved conducting underwater surveys to document kelp abundance, fish populations, and invertebrate communities at marked locations throughout the forest. Each dive lasted approximately 45 minutes, during which we would swim systematic transects while recording observations on underwater slates. We typically completed 2 dives in the morning, returned to the vessel for lunch and a surface interval, then conducted 1 or 2 additional dives in the afternoon. The work was physically demanding and required intense concentration. Maintaining neutral buoyancy while recording detailed observations and handling camera equipment was challenging, particularly in the surge conditions we sometimes encountered. However, I discovered that I loved every aspect of the work. There was something profoundly moving about swimming through the kelp forest, surrounded by towering golden-brown fronds that swayed in the current, observing the complex community of organisms that depended on this ecosystem. I saw harbor seals hunting fish, sea otters cracking open sea urchins on their chests, and countless species of fish and invertebrates that I had previously known only from textbooks. The evenings on the research vessel were equally valuable to my development as a scientist. After dinner, we would gather in the main cabin to enter the day's data into our computers, compare observations, and discuss what we were learning about the kelp forest ecosystem. Professor Chen treated these sessions as informal seminars, asking us questions that pushed us to think critically about our observations and their ecological significance. Why do you think we observed higher fish abundance in areas with denser kelp cover? What factors might explain the variation in urchin populations across different sites? How might climate change affect kelp forest dynamics in the coming decades? These discussions taught me how to think like a research scientist, moving beyond simple observation to developing hypotheses and considering the complex interactions between different components of an ecosystem. Marcus and Jennifer included me in their conversations about their doctoral research, explaining their experimental designs and the questions they were trying to answer. They treated me as a junior colleague rather than simply an undergraduate volunteer, asking for my input on data patterns and explaining sophisticated statistical analyses they were using. This inclusion felt revolutionary after years of being dismissed or overlooked by my own family. One evening about 2 weeks into the expedition, Professor Chen asked me to stay behind after the others had gone to bed. I felt a moment of anxiety, wondering if I had made some mistake in data collection or violated a protocol. However, his expression was thoughtful rather than critical as he poured 2 cups of tea and gestured for me to sit across from him at the small table. "I've been impressed with your work on this expedition, Marina," he began. "You're meticulous with data collection, you ask intelligent questions, and you work well with the team. Have you thought about what you want to do with your degree after graduation?" I explained that I hope to pursue graduate studies in marine ecology and eventually work in marine conservation, either through research or policy. I described my passion for ocean ecosystems and my growing understanding that protecting these environments required both scientific knowledge and the ability to translate that knowledge into effective conservation action. Professor Chen listened carefully, nodding occasionally, before sharing his own career trajectory. He had started as an undergraduate volunteer on research expeditions much like this one, he explained, and those experiences had shaped his decision to pursue a doctorate and dedicate his career to marine research. "You have the potential to make significant contributions to this field," he told me with a directness that felt almost shocking after years of family dismissal. "Your work ethic is exceptional, your observational skills are already well developed, and you have genuine passion for the subject matter. Those qualities are more important than raw intelligence, though you clearly have that as well. I would encourage you to seek out more research opportunities as an undergraduate. Build your skills, develop relationships with faculty members who can mentor you, and position yourself for admission to a strong graduate program when the time comes. The conversation lasted more than an hour, during which Professor Chen offered specific advice about how to maximize my undergraduate experience. He suggested courses I should take, professors I should try to work with, and summer research programs I should apply to. He also spoke honestly about the challenges of a career in marine science, including the competitive nature of graduate admissions, the difficulty of securing research funding, and the reality that many research positions paid modest salaries despite requiring extensive education and expertise. However, his overarching message was one of encouragement and belief in my potential. If you're willing to work hard and stay focused on your goals, you can build a meaningful career in this field, he concluded. Don't let anyone convince you that your ambitions are unrealistic, or that you should settle for something safer. That conversation became a turning point in how I understood my own potential and trajectory. For the first time, an accomplished professional in my chosen field had looked at my work and seen genuine promise rather than simply adequate performance. Professor Chen's belief in my abilities felt like a gift I had not known I was desperately seeking. When I called my parents after returning from the expedition, excited to share what I had learned and the encouragement I had received from Professor Chen, their response was characteristically muted. That sounds interesting, dear, my mother said before immediately shifting the conversation to Vanessa, who was struggling with her coursework at Willamette and might need to reduce her course load. The contrast between Professor Chen's enthusiastic recognition of my potential and my parents' continued disinterest crystallized something important for me. I could continue seeking validation and recognition from people who were fundamentally incapable or unwilling to provide it, or I could build my sense of worth around the recognition I was beginning to receive from the community that actually valued my work and understood my goals. The choice seemed obvious when framed in those terms, yet it still felt like a kind of betrayal or abandonment to accept that my parents would never be the source of encouragement and pride I had always hoped they might become. Sophomore year brought additional research opportunities that built on the foundation established during the kelp forest expedition. I began working in Professor Chen's laboratory during the academic year, assisting with data analysis from various research projects, and learning to use sophisticated software for statistical analysis and data visualization. The work was often tedious, involving hours of entering data, checking for errors, and running preliminary analyses. However, I found satisfaction in the meticulous nature of the work and the growing understanding of how rigorous science was conducted. Professor Chen was a demanding supervisor but also a generous mentor, taking time to explain complex concepts and including me in research team meetings where graduate students presented their work and received feedback. During the summer after my sophomore year, I was accepted into a competitive undergraduate research program at the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute. The program provided a stipend that covered living expenses and placed undergraduate students with research scientists for intensive 10-week research projects. I was matched with Dr. Rebecca Lawson, a researcher studying the impacts of ocean acidification on pteropods, small swimming snails that formed an important part of the ocean food web. My project involved conducting laboratory experiments to measure how different levels of ocean acidification affected pteropod shell development and survival rates. The summer at Monterey Bay was transformative in ways that extended beyond the specific research skills I acquired. Dr. Lawson was a woman in her early 40s who had navigated her own challenging path to becoming a research scientist, including periods of self-doubt and lack of family support. She recognized something of her younger self in me, and became not just a research supervisor, but a genuine mentor who helped me understand the realities of building a career in marine science as a woman. We had regular conversations about work-life balance, about handling the competitiveness of graduate school and academic careers, and about the importance of building a support network of colleagues and mentors who understood the challenges of the field. Dr. Lawson also introduced me to other women in marine science through a networking event she organized midsummer. I met postdoctoral researchers, junior faculty members, and senior scientists who shared their career trajectories and offered advice about navigating graduate school applications and early career challenges. These women became a community of support that was completely separate from my family, A chosen network of people who valued the same things I valued and understood the work I wanted to do in the world. Their encouragement and practical advice felt more valuable than anything my family had ever offered, precisely because it came from people who understood both the challenges I faced and the significance of what I was trying to achieve. The research I conducted that summer resulted in data that contributed to a published paper on ocean acidification impacts, with my name included as a co-author. Seeing my name in print in a scientific journal during my junior year of college felt like tangible validation of the path I had chosen. When the paper was published, I sent a copy to my parents with a letter explaining the significance of the research and the contribution I had made. My mother's response arrived 2 weeks later, a brief note congratulating me on the publication before spending several paragraphs discussing Vanessa's recent struggles with a difficult supervisor at her part-time job and the emotional toll it was taking on her. Junior and senior year accelerated my preparation for graduate school applications. I took advanced courses in marine ecology, oceanography, and statistical analysis. I continued working in Professor Chen's laboratory, gradually taking on more independent responsibilities, and even supervising a freshman student who had joined the lab. I presented my research at an undergraduate research symposium, participated in a study abroad program in Australia where I studied Great Barrier Reef ecology, and systematically built the strong academic record and research experience that would make me competitive for top graduate programs. The graduate school application process during my senior year was intensive and entirely self-directed. I researched programs across the country, identifying faculty members whose research aligned with my interests in climate change impacts on marine ecosystems. I spent weeks crafting personal statements that articulated my research interests, my previous experience, and my career goals. I requested recommendation letters from Professor Chen, Dr. Lawson, and another faculty member I had worked with closely. I studied for the graduate record examination and managed the complex logistics of submitting applications to 12 different programs. My parents were essentially uninvolved in this process, just as they had been uninvolved in my undergraduate applications. When I tried to discuss my graduate school plans with them during winter break of my senior year, the conversation lasted less than 5 minutes before being redirected to Vanessa's upcoming wedding plans. Vanessa had gotten engaged to her college boyfriend Marcus during the fall, and my parents were consumed with helping them plan an elaborate wedding that they were substantially financing. The wedding planning dominated every family conversation, with discussions of venues, catering, flowers, and guest lists occupying hours of attention. The contrast between the attention devoted to Vanessa's wedding and the complete lack of interest in my graduate school applications was painful but no longer surprising. I had learned to expect nothing from my family and to build my life around other sources of support and recognition. When acceptance letters began arriving in the spring, including an offer from the University of Miami's Rosenstiel School of Marine and Atmospheric Science with full funding, I called Professor Chen first rather than my parents. His enthusiastic congratulations and genuine pride in my achievement felt more meaningful than any response I might have received from my family. I did eventually inform my parents of my graduate school acceptance, framing it carefully to avoid seeming like I was seeking praise or making demands on their attention. I mentioned the acceptance during a phone call home, explaining briefly that I would be moving to Miami in the fall to begin doctoral studies in marine ecology. My mother's response was a mixture of confusion and mild concern. "More school, Marina? Haven't you had enough education? When are you going to get a real job and settle down?" My father's contribution was to question whether it was financially wise to spend more years in school rather than entering the workforce and beginning to save money. The complete inability to recognize that a fully funded doctoral position at a prestigious research institution represented a significant achievement, rather than an extended adolescence or financial irresponsibility, revealed everything about how my family viewed my choices and my career. However, by that point in my development, their lack of understanding bothered me less than it once had. I was building a life and career on my own terms, receiving recognition and support from people who understood the value of what I was doing, and I was learning that family validation was not necessary for my happiness or success. The acceptance to Miami represented not just the next step in my education, but confirmation that the path I had chosen for myself despite lack of family support was leading somewhere meaningful and valuable. The transition to Miami and the beginning of my doctoral studies at the Rosenstiel School represented the start of the most intensive period of professional development in my life. The school was located on Virginia Key, a small island connected to mainland Miami by a causeway, surrounded entirely by Biscayne Bay and the Atlantic Ocean. The physical setting created a sense of separation from ordinary urban life, as if the entire institution existed in a space dedicated entirely to understanding and protecting ocean ecosystems. The research facilities were state-of-the-art, including wet labs with flowing seawater systems, extensive aquarium facilities for experimental work, and direct access to coral reef ecosystems that could be reached within minutes by boat. My doctoral advisor, Dr. Sarah Okafor, was a Nigerian-born marine ecologist whose research focused on coral reef resilience and recovery after disturbance events. She had built her career through extraordinary determination, overcoming significant obstacles including family opposition to her educational pursuits, limited financial resources, and the challenges of being a Black woman in a field that remained predominantly white and male. Her path to becoming a tenured professor at a major research institution had required relentless effort, strategic navigation of academic politics, and the development of research that was both scientifically rigorous and relevant to pressing conservation challenges. During our first meeting in her office overlooking Biscayne Bay, Dr. Okafor explained her expectations with clarity that was both intimidating and oddly reassuring. A doctoral program is not simply extended coursework, she began, her Nigerian accent giving her words a musical quality that softened their serious content. It is an apprenticeship in how to become an independent research scientist. You will learn to formulate important questions, design experiments to address those questions, analyze complex data, and communicate your findings to both scientific and public audiences. This process is challenging and often frustrating, but it is also profoundly rewarding for those who have genuine passion for the work. She asked detailed questions about my previous research experience, my long-term career goals, and my understanding of the commitment required for successful doctoral studies. When I described my background, including the self-funded undergraduate education, the research experiences I had sought out independently, and the lack of family support for my academic pursuits, something shifted in her expression. She leaned back in her chair and studied me for a long moment before speaking. "I recognize something of my own journey in your story," she said quietly. "The experience of building a career without family support or encouragement creates both challenges and strengths. The challenges are obvious, the emotional difficulty of lacking that foundation of unconditional support. The strengths are perhaps less obvious but equally important. You have already learned to be self-directed, to persist through difficulties without external encouragement, and to find validation in the work itself rather than in others' approval." That initial conversation established a mentoring relationship that would prove transformative for my development as a scientist and as a person. Dr. Okafor was demanding in her expectations for the quality and rigor of my work, but she was also generous with her time, her knowledge, and her understanding of the non-academic challenges that graduate students often faced. She had regular weekly meetings with each of her graduate students, during which we discussed not just research progress but also professional development, work-life balance, and the strategic decisions that would shape our careers. She introduced her students to colleagues at other institutions, ensured we attended important conferences, and actively worked to create opportunities for us to develop as independent scientists. The first year of doctoral studies involved intensive coursework alongside the beginning of research activities. I took advanced seminars in coral reef ecology, marine biogeochemistry, climate change impacts on ocean systems, and statistical methods for ecological research. The coursework was significantly more demanding than my undergraduate classes, requiring not just absorption of information but critical analysis of scientific literature and the development of original ideas about unresolved questions in the field. I spent countless hours reading research papers, preparing for seminars, and writing critical reviews of current research that pushed me to think deeply about experimental design, data interpretation, and the broader significance of specific studies. Alongside the coursework, I began developing my dissertation research project. Dr. Okafor's research program focused on understanding why some coral reefs showed remarkable resilience after bleaching events while others failed to recover. Coral bleaching occurred when environmental stress, particularly elevated water temperatures associated with climate change, caused corals to expel the symbiotic algae that provided them with nutrition and color. Severe bleaching events could lead to widespread coral death and reef degradation, but some reefs demonstrated surprising capacity to recover even after severe bleaching. Understanding the factors that promoted resilience and recovery was crucial for developing effective conservation strategies in an era of accelerating climate change. My specific dissertation project would focus on the role of coral genetics and local environmental conditions in determining recovery outcomes after bleaching. The work would involve a combination of field studies at coral reefs in the Florida Keys and the Caribbean, laboratory experiments examining coral physiology under different environmental conditions, and genetic analyses to identify characteristics associated with resilience. The project was ambitious in scope and would require mastering multiple different methodological approaches, including underwater survey techniques, laboratory experimental design, and molecular genetic methods. The second year of the doctoral program marked the transition from primarily coursework to primarily research activities. I began spending extensive time in the field, conducting surveys at coral reef sites in the Florida Keys to document patterns of coral bleaching and recovery. The fieldwork required early morning departures from the Rosenstiel School, loading research equipment onto small boats and motoring out to reef sites where I would spend hours underwater documenting coral health, measuring environmental conditions, and collecting small tissue samples for genetic analysis. The work was physically demanding, particularly during summer months when water temperatures were highest and fieldwork days stretched long under intense sun. I discovered that I loved the fieldwork despite its challenges. There was something deeply satisfying about the systematic collection of data that would eventually contribute to understanding important ecological patterns. Each survey dive followed careful protocols, swimming along marked transects and recording standardized observations about coral cover, species composition, and signs of stress or recovery. The underwater environment of the coral reefs was stunningly beautiful, with complex three-dimensional structures created by coral growth supporting diverse communities of fish, invertebrates, and algae. Even reefs that had experienced significant bleaching and degradation retained a haunting beauty and clear evidence of the ecological complexity they had once supported. The laboratory component of my research involved maintaining live corals in aquarium systems where I could manipulate environmental conditions and measure their physiological responses. I spent countless hours in the wet lab, monitoring water quality, adjusting temperature and light conditions, and collecting samples to measure coral health indicators. The experimental work required meticulous attention to detail and careful record-keeping, as small variations in environmental conditions could significantly affect coral responses. I learned to work with sophisticated equipment for measuring photosynthesis rates, respiration, and other physiological processes that indicated coral health and stress levels. The molecular genetic work was perhaps the most technically challenging component of my research. I needed to extract DNA from small coral tissue samples, amplify specific genetic regions using polymerase chain reaction techniques, and sequence those regions to identify genetic variations among individual corals. The laboratory techniques were finicky and prone to failure, requiring patience and systematic troubleshooting when results were not as expected. I spent weeks learning proper techniques from a postdoctoral researcher in Dr. Okafor's lab, practicing the delicate manipulations required, and learning to interpret the complex data that genetic sequencing produced. The combination of field ecology, experimental physiology, and molecular genetics created a comprehensive but demanding research program. There were many moments of frustration when experiments failed, when field conditions prevented data collection, or when analytical approaches did not yield clear results. Graduate school required tolerance for ambiguity and failure that was sometimes difficult to maintain. However, Dr. Okafor was a consistent source of support during challenging periods, helping me troubleshoot methodological problems, reframe research questions when initial approaches were not successful, and maintain perspective about the long-term trajectory of the work. One particularly difficult period occurred during my third year when several months of experimental work produced results that contradicted my initial hypotheses about factors affecting coral resilience. I had predicted that corals with certain genetic characteristics would show greater physiological resilience to thermal stress, but my experimental data showed no clear relationship between the genetic markers I had identified and the physiological responses I was measuring. The results were disappointing and seemed to undermine months of effort. I met with Dr. Okafor feeling discouraged and uncertain about how to proceed. Her response was characteristically direct and ultimately reassuring. Negative results are still results, Marina, she explained. Science progresses not just through confirming our hypotheses but through discovering that our initial assumptions were incorrect. Your data are telling you something important, which is that the relationship between coral genetics and stress resilience is more complex than the simple model you initially proposed. Now your job is to think more deeply about what factors might explain the patterns you are observing, and to design additional experiments to test refined hypotheses. She helped me reframe the disappointing results as an opportunity for deeper investigation, rather than as failure. We spent several hours discussing alternative explanations for the patterns I had observed, considering factors I had not initially included in my experimental design, and developing new hypotheses that were more nuanced and sophisticated than my original predictions. The experience taught me that research was fundamentally a process of iterative refinement, where initial ideas were tested, modified based on results, and tested again in an ongoing cycle that gradually approached better understanding of complex natural phenomena. The third and fourth years of my doctoral program were the most productive in terms of data collection and analysis. I had refined my research questions based on early results, established efficient field and laboratory protocols, and was generating substantial amounts of high-quality data. I began analyzing the accumulated data systematically, looking for patterns that could address my core questions about what factors determined coral reef resilience and recovery. The analytical work required sophisticated statistical approaches that I had to teach myself through reading technical literature and consulting with statisticians at the university. I spent months learning to use specialized software, testing different analytical approaches, and working to ensure that my conclusions were supported by rigorous statistical evidence. The process of transforming raw data into meaningful scientific insights was intellectually demanding, but deeply satisfying. Patterns began to emerge from the analysis suggesting that coral resilience was determined not by single factors, but by complex interactions between coral genetics, local environmental conditions, and the composition of symbiotic algae communities. Corals with certain genetic characteristics showed greater resilience, but only when they were associated with particular types of symbiotic algae, and when local water quality was relatively high. The complexity of these interactions helped explain why previous studies had often found inconsistent results when examining single factors in isolation. These findings became the basis for my dissertation, and for several scientific papers that I wrote during my fourth and fifth years of graduate school. The process of scientific writing was another skill that required extensive development. Dr. Okafor worked closely with me on my first manuscript, providing detailed feedback on everything from overall structure and logical flow to specific word choices and figure design. Scientific writing required clarity, precision, and the ability to present complex information in ways that were accessible to other researchers. I revised that first manuscript more than a dozen times based on feedback from Dr. Okafor and from peer reviewers at the journal before it was finally accepted for publication. Seeing my research published in peer-reviewed journals felt like tangible validation of years of intensive work. Each published paper represented not just the specific findings it reported, but also the countless hours of fieldwork, laboratory experiments, data analysis, and writing that had produced those findings. The publications established my credibility as an emerging researcher and would be crucial for securing postdoctoral positions and eventually permanent research positions. Dr. Okafor emphasized that publications were the currency of academic science, the primary way that research contributions were evaluated and recognized by the broader scientific community. During my graduate years, I maintained minimal contact with my family beyond obligatory phone calls on holidays and birthdays. The conversations followed predictable patterns, with my parents asking perfunctory questions about my studies before launching into detailed updates about Vanessa's life. She had given birth to her first child during my second year of graduate school, and subsequent pregnancies followed in rapid succession. My parents were intensely involved in their grandchildren's lives, providing childcare multiple days per week and substantial financial support for Vanessa and Marcus, who continued to struggle with financial stability despite both working full-time. When I tried to share significant developments in my research, such as the acceptance of my first paper in a major journal or my selection to present at an international conference, the response was consistently muted. "That's nice, dear," my mother would say before immediately redirecting the conversation to some challenge Vanessa was facing with the children or some cute thing one of my nephews had done. The message was clear and unchanged from my childhood. My achievements, regardless of their significance, were less important and less worthy of family attention than the mundane details of Vanessa's domestic life. The contrast between my family's disinterest and the recognition I was receiving in my professional community became increasingly stark. During my 4th year, I was selected to present my research at the International Coral Reef Symposium, the most prestigious conference in my field. The selection was competitive and represented significant recognition for a graduate student. I gave a 15-minute presentation to a room of more than 200 researchers, including many of the leading scientists in coral reef ecology. The presentation was well received, and several prominent researchers approached me afterward to discuss my findings and offer encouragement about my career trajectory. When I called my parents to share this achievement, my mother's response was characteristically underwhelming. "Conference presentation, that's nice. Did I tell you that Vanessa's oldest just started kindergarten?" They had the most adorable first day of school ceremony. The implicit message was that my professional achievements, regardless of their significance within my field, were less noteworthy than routine childhood milestones of my nieces and nephews. The comparison would have been painful except that I had largely stopped seeking validation from my parents, finding instead a community of colleagues and mentors who understood and valued my work. Dr. Okafor became increasingly important as both a professional mentor and a personal support during my graduate years. She had an uncanny ability to recognize when I was struggling emotionally or professionally, and she made time for conversations that addressed not just immediate research challenges, but also larger questions about career direction and work-life balance. During one particularly difficult period in my 4th year when I was feeling overwhelmed by the demands of research, writing, and teaching responsibilities, she invited me to her home for dinner with her family. The evening provided a window into how Dr. Okafor balanced her demanding career with a rich personal life that included a supportive husband and 2 teenage children. She spoke openly about the challenges of maintaining that balance, acknowledging that there were periods when work demands necessarily took priority, but emphasizing the importance of protecting time for relationships and activities unrelated to research. She also shared her own experiences of family disapproval regarding her career choices, describing how her parents had wanted her to pursue medicine rather than marine biology, and had struggled to understand why she would dedicate her life to studying coral reefs. "Your family's inability to recognize your achievements says nothing about the value of those achievements," she told me directly. "It reflects their own limitations and the narrow way they have chosen to define success and importance. You have built something remarkable through your own determination and intelligence. The work you are doing matters for ocean conservation, and the scientific community recognizes the quality of your contributions. That recognition is more valuable and more meaningful than approval from people who do not understand or value what you do." Her words provided permission to stop seeking validation from sources that would never provide it, and to instead build my sense of worth around the recognition I was receiving from people who actually understood my work and its significance. This shift in perspective was liberating in ways that were difficult to fully articulate. I began to feel lighter, less burdened by the constant low-level disappointment of family interactions that never provided the recognition or support I had spent years hoping they might eventually offer. The final year of my doctoral program focused on completing my dissertation, publishing remaining research findings, and applying for postdoctoral positions that would bridge between graduate school and eventual permanent research positions. The job market in marine science was competitive, with many more qualified applicants than available positions. However, my strong publication record, excellent recommendations from Dr. Okafor and other faculty members, and the clear trajectory of my research program made me a competitive candidate for the positions I was pursuing. I applied for postdoctoral fellowships at research institutions and environmental consulting firms, casting a wide net geographically while focusing on positions that would allow me to continue developing my research program while gaining practical experience in conservation applications. The application process was intensive, requiring preparation of research statements, teaching philosophies, and detailed research proposals. I participated in video interviews and eventually traveled to several institutions for in-person presentations of my research and meetings with potential colleagues. The offer I ultimately accepted came from Pacific Marine Consultants, an environmental consulting firm based in Seattle that worked at the intersection of research and applied conservation. The position would allow me to continue conducting research on climate change impacts on marine ecosystems, while also contributing to consulting projects that directly informed conservation policy and management decisions. The salary was substantially higher than typical academic postdoctoral positions, and the work would provide exposure to real-world conservation challenges and policy processes that were often divorced from purely academic research. The decision to accept the consulting position, rather than a traditional academic postdoctoral fellowship, represented a deliberate choice about the kind of career I wanted to build. I valued rigorous research, but I was increasingly committed to ensuring that research translated into conservation action, rather than remaining confined to academic journals. Pacific Marine Consultants offered the opportunity to bridge that gap, conducting research that maintained scientific rigor while directly addressing questions relevant to conservation policy and management. The position also meant returning to the Pacific Northwest, bringing me geographically closer to my family, though I had mixed feelings about that proximity. I defended my dissertation in early May, presenting my research findings to a committee of faculty members who asked probing questions about my methods, interpretations, and the broader significance of my work. The defense lasted nearly 3 hours and was intellectually demanding, but I emerged with a passed dissertation and the right to use the title doctor. The achievement represented the culmination of 5 years of intensive work, and the formal recognition that I had successfully completed the training necessary to function as an independent research scientist. Dr. Okafor hosted a small celebration after my defense, inviting my laboratory colleagues and several other faculty members to mark the occasion. The gathering felt more like a family celebration than my actual family had ever provided, with people who genuinely understood the significance of what I had accomplished, and who offered heartfelt congratulations and encouragement for my future career. When I called my parents to inform them that I had successfully defended my dissertation and would be moving to Seattle for my new position, their response was predictably lukewarm. "That's great, Marina. So does this mean you're finally done with school? You'll be making good money now?" The emphasis on financial compensation rather than the intellectual achievement or the significance of the work revealed everything about how they conceptualize value and success. The move to Seattle in late summer marked the beginning of a new chapter that combined the intellectual rigor of research with the practical application of science to real-world conservation challenges. Pacific Marine Consultants occupied a renovated warehouse building in the Ballard neighborhood, a formerly industrial area that had transformed into a hub for maritime businesses, craft breweries, and the kind of coffee shops that served as unofficial offices for Seattle's substantial population of remote workers and creative professionals. The building retained its industrial character with exposed brick walls and high ceilings crisscrossed with visible ductwork, but the interior had been carefully designed to create functional workspaces including laboratories, meeting rooms, and an open office area where the consulting staff worked at standing desks arranged to facilitate collaboration. The firm employed approximately 30 people including marine biologists, environmental engineers, policy specialists, and project managers who coordinated the complex logistics of consulting projects. The work culture was notably different from academic environments I had experienced during graduate school. Projects operated on tight timelines dictated by client needs and regulatory processes, rather than the more flexible rhythms of academic research. Deliverables needed to meet not just scientific standards, but also the practical requirements of clients who were using our analyses to inform management decisions, permitting applications, or conservation planning. The pressure to produce high-quality work quickly was significant, but it also created a sense of purpose and urgency that I found energizing after years of research that sometimes felt disconnected from immediate real-world applications. My official title was Marine Ecology Consultant, a position that involved conducting research and analysis for various projects, while also gradually developing the skills necessary to manage client relationships and lead project teams. My starting salary was $78,000 annually, a figure that felt almost surreal after years of living on graduate student stipends that had barely covered basic living expenses. The financial security allowed me to rent a comfortable one-bedroom condominium in Capitol Hill, with a small balcony that offered a partial view of Puget Sound. I furnished the space simply but thoughtfully, creating an environment that felt like a genuine home, rather than the temporary student housing I had occupied for nearly a decade. The first project I was assigned to involved conducting an environmental impact assessment for a proposed expansion of shipping operations at the Port of Tacoma. The Port Authority needed to understand how increased vessel traffic and associated activities might affect local marine ecosystems, particularly populations of harbor seals and various fish species that use the area. My role involved reviewing existing data on marine life in the affected area, conducting additional field surveys to document current conditions, and analyzing how the proposed activities might impact different species based on their known habitat requirements and sensitivities to various types of disturbance. The project required skills I had developed during graduate school, including underwater survey techniques, data analysis, and scientific writing, but it also demanded new competencies around communicating complex ecological information to non-scientist audiences and working within the constraints of regulatory frameworks and client expectations. My project manager was a woman named Catherine Brennan, a marine biologist in her early 40s who had spent 15 years working in environmental consulting after completing her doctorate at the University of Washington. She had a remarkable ability to translate complex ecological concepts into clear language that clients could understand and use to inform their decision-making. Catherine took her role as mentor seriously, recognizing that I needed guidance not just on the technical aspects of the work, but also on the professional skills required to succeed in consulting. She invited me to observe client meetings where she presented technical findings and fielded questions, allowing me to see how she navigated the delicate balance between scientific accuracy and practical communication. After meetings, she would debrief with me about the dynamics she had observed, explaining why she had chosen particular ways of framing information or responding to client concerns. The mentorship felt similar in some ways to what I had received from Dr. Okafor, but with a focus on applied skills that were essential for consulting work but rarely taught in academic settings. The Port of Tacoma project consumed most of my first 6 months at Pacific Marine Consultants. I spent weeks conducting field surveys in the cold waters of Puget Sound, documenting seal populations and fish communities through a combination of underwater observations, acoustic monitoring, and consultation of existing databases maintained by state and federal agencies. The data collection required early morning departures and long days on research vessels, work that was physically demanding but familiar from my graduate research. I found satisfaction in the systematic documentation of marine life, in an area that would soon be subject to increased human activity, knowing that the data I was collecting would directly inform decisions about how that activity would be managed to minimize ecological harm. The analytical phase of the project required synthesizing data from my field surveys with information from scientific literature about how different species responded to various types of disturbance. I developed models predicting how harbor seal populations might be affected by increased vessel noise and activity, analyzing whether critical haul-out sites where seals rested and nursed their young would remain viable given the proposed changes. The analysis suggested that while some impacts were likely, careful management of vessel routes and timing could substantially reduce disturbance to seal populations during sensitive periods like puppying season. The final deliverable was a comprehensive report running more than 200 pages that documented baseline conditions, assessed potential impacts, and recommended specific mitigation measures that would minimize ecological harm while allowing the port expansion to proceed. Catherine supervised my writing closely, pushing me to present technical information clearly without oversimplifying complex ecological relationships. The report needed to be accessible to Port Authority staff and regulatory agencies, while maintaining the scientific rigor that would withstand scrutiny from other technical experts who might review our work. The balance required careful attention to how information was framed and presented, skills that I gradually developed through multiple rounds of revision and Catherine's patient feedback. When the final report was submitted to the Port of Tacoma, the response from the client was enthusiastically positive. The Port Authority's environmental manager called Catherine to express appreciation for the thoroughness of our analysis and the practical nature of our recommendations. Several of our suggested mitigation measures were incorporated directly into the port's expansion plans, including seasonal restrictions on certain activities during harbor seal puppying season and modified vessel routing to reduce disturbance to critical habitat areas. The direct translation of our scientific analysis into concrete management actions felt profoundly satisfying in ways that academic research publications, valuable as they were, had never quite achieved. The success of the Port of Tacoma project established my credibility within Pacific Marine consultants and led to assignments on increasingly complex and high-profile projects. During my second year with the firm, I was assigned as the lead scientist for a project assessing the potential impacts of offshore renewable energy development on seabird populations. A developer was proposing to construct a wind farm in federal waters off the Oregon coast, and our firm had been contracted to conduct the wildlife impact assessment required for the permitting process. The project was technically complex and politically sensitive, as renewable energy development was broadly supported for climate change mitigation, but also raised legitimate concerns about potential impacts on marine wildlife. The Seabird Impact Assessment required designing and implementing a comprehensive survey program to document which species use the proposed wind farm area, during what seasons, and for what purposes. Some seabird species were known to be vulnerable to collision with wind turbines, while others might avoid wind farm areas entirely, effectively losing access to foraging habitat. Understanding the potential magnitude and nature of impacts required detailed knowledge of seabird ecology, combined with sophisticated modeling approaches to predict how birds might interact with the proposed structures. I assembled a project team including 2 junior biologists who would assist with field surveys and data analysis, and I coordinated with ornithology experts at universities and conservation organizations who had relevant expertise about seabird behavior and vulnerability to offshore wind development. The leadership role was new for me and required skills I had not developed during graduate school, including project planning, team management, and coordination among multiple collaborators with different areas of expertise. I found the challenges both demanding and energizing, discovering that I had aptitude for the organizational and interpersonal aspects of project leadership, alongside the technical scientific work. The field surveys involved spending weeks at sea on research vessels, conducting systematic observations of seabird distribution and behavior in the proposed wind farm area and surrounding waters. We documented which species were present, how abundant they were, what activities they were engaged in, and how their distribution varied with factors like time of day, season, and oceanographic conditions. The work required patience and meticulous attention to detail, as accurate identification of seabirds at sea could be challenging, and maintaining consistent survey protocols across multiple observers and survey periods was essential for producing reliable data. The analytical phase involved developing models that could predict how seabirds might be affected by the wind farm, based on their observed distribution patterns and known vulnerabilities to collision or displacement. I worked with statisticians and wind energy experts to understand the technical specifications of the proposed turbines, and to model how different seabird species might interact with the structures. The analysis suggested that while some impacts were likely inevitable, careful design choices including turbine placement and operational parameters could substantially reduce collision risks for the most vulnerable species. The findings were presented in a comprehensive impact assessment that became a key document in the regulatory review of the wind farm proposal. The assessment received attention beyond the immediate permitting process, as it represented one of the most thorough analyses of potential seabird impacts from offshore wind development on the West Coast. I was invited to present the findings at a conference on renewable energy and wildlife, where the work was well received by both wildlife conservation professionals and renewable energy developers who were trying to understand and minimize the ecological footprint of offshore wind projects. The recognition I received for the Seabird Impact Assessment work led to my promotion to Senior Marine Ecology Consultant during my third year with Pacific Marine Consultants. The promotion came with increased salary, greater responsibility for project leadership, and the expectation that I would contribute to business development by identifying potential new projects and cultivating relationships with clients and partners. I was 29 years old and had become one of the youngest senior consultants in the firm's history, an achievement that reflected both the quality of my technical work and my development of the leadership and communication skills essential for success in consulting. The promotion was announced at a firm-wide meeting where the managing director, Marina Chen, highlighted my contributions to several successful projects and expressed confidence in my continued growth as a leader within the organization. My colleagues offered congratulations that felt genuine and warm, and several people mentioned that my work had set a high standard for scientific rigor and clear communication that they aspired to match. The recognition from colleagues whose work I respected was deeply meaningful, creating a sense of belonging to a professional community that valued the same qualities I valued. When I called my parents to share the news of my promotion, I hoped perhaps irrationally that this achievement might finally register as significant enough to merit genuine enthusiasm. I explained carefully what the promotion meant, the recognition it represented, and the increased responsibilities I would be taking on. My mother's response followed the familiar pattern of perfunctory congratulations before immediate redirection. "That's nice, dear. Your father and I are so busy helping Vanessa with the new baby. Did I tell you she just had her third? Little Isabella is adorable but not sleeping well, so we've been going over there most evenings to help out. Vanessa is just exhausted." The conversation continued in this vein for 20 minutes, with detailed updates about Vanessa's children, her struggles with the demands of parenting 3 small children, and my parents' intensive involvement in providing childcare and support. When I attempted to share more details about my work, explaining a particularly interesting project assessing marine protected area effectiveness, my mother interrupted to ask whether I had thought about when I might settle down and have children of my own. "At 29, you're not getting any younger," she observed. "Career success is fine, but don't you want a family?" The implication that my career achievements were somehow less important or less fulfilling than Vanessa's domestic life was both familiar and increasingly frustrating. I had built something substantial through years of intensive effort and sacrifice, and I was contributing to ocean conservation in meaningful ways that would benefit ecosystems and communities far beyond my immediate family. Yet somehow in my parents' calculation, these achievements were less valuable than reproduction and conventional domestic arrangements. The conversation left me feeling a familiar mixture of hurt and anger, emotions that I processed later with my therapist, whom I had begun seeing regularly after moving to Seattle. Therapy provided a space to examine the family dynamics that had shaped my development, and to work on building a sense of self-worth that was genuinely independent of family validation. My therapist, Dr. Jennifer Kwan, helped me understand that the patterns established in childhood had created a dynamic where I was perpetually seeking recognition from sources that were fundamentally incapable of providing it. "Your parents have invested decades in a particular narrative about their daughters," she explained. "Vanessa is the one who needs support, and whose life deserves constant attention and celebration. You are the self-sufficient one whose achievements are expected and therefore unremarkable." Challenging that narrative would require them to confront uncomfortable truths about how they have treated you, which most people are unwilling or unable to do. The therapeutic work involved gradually releasing the hope that my parents would change, and learning to build my identity and sense of worth around my actual accomplishments, and the recognition I received from people who understood and valued my work. The process was not linear or easy, as decades of conditioning were not undone through simple intellectual understanding. However, over time I found myself less affected by my parents' dismissals, less inclined to seek their approval, and more confident in the value of what I had built independently. During my 4th year with Pacific Marine Consultants, I took on my most significant project to date. A coalition of environmental organizations and tribal governments was proposing to establish a new marine protected area, encompassing a biologically rich section of the Washington coast. The proposed protected area would restrict certain fishing activities and other extractive uses to allow ecosystem recovery and protect critical habitat for species including salmon, rockfish, and various marine mammals. However, the proposal was controversial, with commercial fishing interests arguing that the restrictions would harm their livelihoods, and that existing management measures were sufficient to protect marine resources. Pacific Marine Consultants was contracted to conduct an independent scientific assessment of the ecological conditions in the proposed protected area, and to evaluate whether protection measures would likely achieve the stated conservation objectives. The project was politically charged, with multiple stakeholder groups holding strong opinions about the proposal, and ready to scrutinize any scientific analysis that might support or undermine their positions. The work would require not just technical excellence, but also the ability to maintain scientific credibility and objectivity in a contentious political environment. I led a team of 6 scientists in conducting comprehensive surveys of marine life in the proposed protected area and adjacent waters. We documented fish populations through underwater visual surveys and baited camera systems, assessed seafloor habitat conditions, and compiled historical data on fishing pressure and ecosystem changes over recent decades. The fieldwork was intensive and technically demanding, requiring careful coordination of multiple survey methods and ensuring consistency across different observers and sampling periods. We spent the better part of 6 months collecting data, often working in challenging weather conditions and rough seas that made survey work difficult and occasionally dangerous. The analytical phase involved synthesizing our survey data with historical information to understand how the ecosystem had changed over time, and whether the proposed protection measures were likely to facilitate recovery of depleted species or degraded habitats. The analysis suggested that the area had indeed experienced significant ecological changes over recent decades, with declines in several important fish species and degradation of seafloor habitats from intensive trawl fishing. However, the analysis also indicated that some areas had shown signs of recovery where fishing pressure had been reduced, suggesting that protection measures could be effective if properly designed and enforced. The final report presented these findings carefully, acknowledging both the evidence supporting protection and the legitimate concerns of fishing communities whose livelihoods would be affected by new restrictions. We recommended specific boundaries and regulations that would maximize conservation benefits while minimizing socioeconomic impacts, including areas where fishing restrictions should be most stringent and others where modified rather than eliminated fishing activities might be compatible with conservation goals. The report was released publicly and received extensive media coverage, with various stakeholder groups selectively citing portions that supported their positions, while sometimes ignoring the nuance and complexity of our full analysis. Despite the political controversy, the scientific quality of our work was widely recognized by technical experts who reviewed the report. Several prominent marine ecologists and fisheries scientists provided public comments praising the thoroughness of our analysis and the balanced way we had presented findings. The state legislature ultimately used our report as a key technical foundation for their deliberations about the Marine Protected Area proposal, and while the final boundaries and regulations differed somewhat from our recommendations, the protected area was established with strong bipartisan support. Knowing that our scientific work had directly informed this significant conservation decision felt like the culmination of everything I had worked toward since first falling in love with ocean science. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.